Tonight on Life on the Rock, we have Peter Range, who will discuss pro-life issues. I'll give a reflection on the beauty of nature and much more. Welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight our guest is Peter Range. He is Director for the Office of Life and Justice for the Diocese of Toledo. And this is a continuing interview we did with him. We're going to talk more about some of the broader life issues tonight: immigration, marriage and family, religious liberty. So you don't want to miss the show tonight.
Right, and I think too, Peter does a good example of just drawing out just kind of the difference between the culture of life and the culture of death, and really how a lot of that's been building, in this country especially, just in the recent years. So it's really a show you don't want to miss, and he's just got a lot of great things to say. So we're now going to a video on the restorative ability of nature.
We're here at one of the beautiful beaches in San Francisco. The rocky cliffs, the beautiful water, and the waves crashing in. I just love it. I love to walk out here. It just has a way of quieting me. It kind of fills up your senses with smells and beautiful sounds, beautiful images, birds and everything. And it's such a powerful thing I think we need to get back to a little bit in our culture, that we can live in a virtual world, very distracted, very fast-paced with work, very fast-paced with our media, what we're watching, very super stimulating. But to come out in nature, there's something restorative about it. Maybe there's so many things alive about it, there's so much movement. And you see, it lifts our minds and hearts to God. That God created all this. He made it. The beauty that we see here is an image, just an image of the beauty that God is in himself. He is beauty itself. And so to come and to fill us up, to quiet our souls, to put us in a kind of contemplative stance towards God, just to say a little prayer, to be quiet. Nature has a way of quieting us. We need that silence. I heard it said in meditation that God creates in silence. You look up at the stars, they're being maintained in silence. That God, in a sense, is silence. And nature has a way of just calming us so we can receive, so we can be open to God and to his working in our life. That beauty refreshes, restores us, and just sort of lifts, our spirit to God. So, hopefully there's, something you can do where you live. Take a walk in a park or outside, a beautiful day, and just think about God and be renewed. Welcome back, Peter Range. We just had you on a few weeks ago, and last time we largely talked about the abortion issue. This week we're going to broaden it a little bit, talk about immigration, religious liberty, and some marriage and family issues. And we just went through this very heated, difficult political season, great animosity and things. And sometimes the pro-life side is accused of just being single issue. I had a conversation with an old friend who was kind of throwing that in my face and stuff. But it's a much bigger issue right now. I'd like to describe it too. We're talking about just fundamental worldviews, that of morality, especially when it comes to marriage and family, religious freedom issues, and of course abortion, pro-life issues. It's big what we're facing. So first let's talk a little bit about immigration. That certainly Christians are called to be in that discussion, to try to promote humane conditions, to be welcoming to the immigrant. And you yourself, you've done a lot of work in that area in Central America. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Father Mark. So first, just to kind of set the record straight when it comes to, how we approach these issues. Pope Francis, who's been a champion, of course, for immigrants and refugees and their rights, is someone who has called the abortion issue the cornerstone of the common good. So it's not that we're single issue voters, it's just we have a foundational issue that we have to care about because that's the foundation. The USCCB almost compared it to the building of a house. You know, all these other issues, the right to immigrate, the right to education, the right to healthcare, they are kind of like the sides of the house and the roof, if you will. But the foundation is the right to simply live. And so that's why we fight so hard for that right to life and the sheer number of children that are being aborted. I mean, 1 million a year, every single year alone in this country right here. However, yeah, when it comes to this issue of immigration, it's imperative that we as Catholics, having been many times in the past immigrants ourselves, care about this issue and fight for immigrant rights. I had the great opportunity in my junior year at John Carroll University to travel to Ecuador, and it was an experience that just really opened my eyes. I went to a community called Vente de Ocho, which was outside this little town of Duran in Ecuador. And in Vente Ocho, they were celebrating the fact that they were going to have a new school. And it was the first school for the community. What they didn't tell us before we arrived, though, was that this community was built on a garbage dump. And so we arrived at the garbage dump, and that smell of the refuse and the buzzards flying ahead and the young 7-year-old kid who was looking for the garbage for his next meal, those are images that I'll never forget. You know, all the other kids, I can make them laugh in my broken Spanish, but that young boy there, he was just so hungry for food. I think it was Gandhi, in fact, who said that some people are so hungry in the world that God can only appear to them in the form of bread. And so I certainly experienced that with that young boy there in the trash dump outside Vente de Ocho. So that was an experience that made me deeply appreciative of everything that I have here in the United States of America and helped me understand why people are literally dying to get into our country. Having had experiences also in Port-au-Prince, in a little town called Cirque Soleil, right in the heart of Port-au-Prince there, where the kids, I mean, they actually, their meal was whatever little vegetables they could get, and then they were baked in mud. And that's what they had to eat for the day. So we have to appreciate as a church that individuals immigrating in this country are often coming for a better life. And so if I can maybe just give us 3 principles by which we could approach this issue of immigration, possibly we could find some common ground both on the right and left on this issue, politically speaking, so that we can move forward for comprehensive immigration reform as the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops have called us to. Those 3 principles are this. One, first and foremost, we can't forget that the prime principle of all Catholic social the prime principle of all Catholic social teaching is the dignity of the human person. So that's every person we disagree with on this issue, whether you're Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. And that's also every immigrant in our midst, whether they're documented or undocumented. Every person made in the image and likeness of God, and our language concerning immigrants really matters. We have to treat them again as human persons. The second, though, is the reality that every nation that exists has to have laws. And if a nation doesn't have laws, then it ceases to be a nation. So we have to appreciate as Catholics that, you know, even Pope Francis himself in an article that was published in El País in January 22nd talked about, yes, a country has a right to have borders. Otherwise, again, they wouldn't be a nation themselves. Lastly, though, right from the Catechism of the Catholic Church 2241, the more prosperous nations, we have a duty and responsibility to help those immigrants seeking a better life. And so if we take these principles and apply them to the immigration issue, I think we can come with some common sense reforms to help the reality of the country that we're living in right now. So the country that we're living in right now, I mean, there's 10 million or so undocumented immigrants that work in our agricultural sector, for example. So when I worked in Immokalee, Florida, working with immigrants, everyone knew that Immokalee would swell from around 20,000 people to 40,000 people during picking season when immigrants would come from the border to pick tomatoes and peppers, and then they would make their way up the East Coast all the way up into Michigan, picking blueberries and other produce that we buy in our air conditioning grocery store. So they are a fundamental part of the economy, something that we have to acknowledge. And why can't we make it more easy for those individuals who are here that are working hard? They're a part of our communities, they're a part of our churches, to be able to stay here, to work, and to be able to help their families, as they're often doing back home, who are literally starving because there isn't much resources in their home country. And lastly, I think another important thing about this, immigration issue and deportations that we've seen both in the Obama administration and then the Trump administration as well, is that a lot of these deportations, they break up families. And we in the Catholic Church, we fundamentally believe that the core unit of society is the family, a mom and a dad caring for their kids. And if you look at statistics on generational poverty, for example, one statistic that you'll see that leads to poverty more than anything else is if the father is not in the home. That leads to more high school dropouts. That leads to more alcohol and drug abuse, and we don't want to see that. So when we deport fathers or we deport mothers out of this country, we're breaking down the family. And that's not good for anybody, because that leaves individuals more dependent upon their government for their sustenance. And that just swells the size of government, something, again, that through Catholic social teaching, we know the principle of subsidiarity isn't good for the betterment of the family, for the betterment of the church, and not certainly for the betterment of our nation.
And subsidiarity being defined as, you had a nice definition I saw on your website, that problems are best handled at the level at which they arise, and that limits the state intervention in our affairs, especially when it comes to family and society, because that's part of issues we're facing now as well with regards to the family, is this new gender ideology and trying to redefine marriage and education issues, accreditation for our institutions and our schools and things. That's all in the forefront right now. We have a new administration that is totally radically committed to abortion, on demand, and has seemed to buy into this new sexual ideology, that our secular culture's promoting. But, as Christians, as Catholics, we need to stand up, because the family is so important, to pass on the faith, to form kids, to stand up for what marriage is, the complementarity of the male and the female, one man, one woman, and also to provide support for the family, social, morally speaking, economically, that healthy family is just so vital for the faith and for society as a whole. And I feel like we're just going to have a big battle coming these next 4 years.
Yeah, Father Mark, and the battle's already arrived in so many different ways. So you mentioned that idea again of subsidiarity, that local issues are best handled by local people. But we see already from the state an encroachment in the level of the family. So just down the road here from Toledo, Ohio, where I live, is Cincinnati. And unfortunately, there was a case this past year where a young woman was identified as transgender, and she was seeking to take hormone replacement drugs to help her transition. The parents, who are Christians, stepped in and said, sweetie, we love you, but we don't think this is the best course of action. Well, this case actually ended up in the courts, and a judge actually ruled to remove that child from the parents' care so that she could begin receiving these dangerous hormone drugs to help her in her transition. So that's a grave violation of subsidiarity. That's a grave violation of the family and the family unit. And as I mentioned, that battle is already here. So that let me just define two ways that's already taking place. We've already seen this with private businesses. Everybody knows the case of Jack Phillips from Colorado, the baker being forced, of course, to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. Thankfully, he won his case in the Supreme Court, but then was promptly sued again by an individual claiming to be transgender, wanted to celebrate their transition. We've seen that with photographers in New Mexico and Kentucky. We saw that with an individual who just simply owned a farm in Michigan, and he would sell his goods at the local farmer's market. And he had on his Facebook page that he believed that marriage is between one man and one woman. Well, the city found out about this, and they said, because you believe that, you can no longer sell your goods here in the farmer's market. But then it extends, to foster care agencies and adoption agencies as well. Catholic Charities has been shut down in the state of Illinois, the state of Michigan, in San Francisco, the Archdiocese of D.C., all because we believe that every child deserves a mother and a father. So the battle, it's already here, and unfortunately, we have to be prepared that it might get worse. As you mentioned, this new incoming administration with President-elect and now President Joe Biden, he is just nominated to be his new Health and Human Services Director, Javier Becerra, the Attorney General from California. This was an individual who would actually try in court to force pro-life pregnancy centers there in California to advertise abortions. Not only that, he fought the HHS for many years to make sure that Catholic agencies had to supply not only contraceptives for their employees, but also abortions as well. So Catholic missionary organizations being forced in their healthcare plans to provide abortions for the individuals who worked for them. I mean, it just defies common sense, it defies justice, and it defies the very principles upon which this nation was founded. Let me just mention this. When Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists talking about, look, we don't want the state to interfere into the affairs of the church, that there would be a wall of separation. He wasn't worried about the church meddling in the affairs of the state. In fact, I mean, still to this day, we begin every congressional session with a prayer. "In God we trust" is on our coins. That wasn't Jefferson's fear. No, his fear was that the state would begin to encroach in the affairs of the church. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we're seeing in our nation today. And so we have to make a choice as a church, from our bishops down to us as lay people as well. Are we going to stand with Christ? Are we going to stand for religious freedom? Because that is fundamental to who we are as a nation. And this nation will not survive unless we can stand on that first fundamental freedom, and that's the freedom of religion.
Right. And on top of all that, problems with the government, we have problems with big tech bearing down on us to limit our free speech and things. But we just have a minute or two left. I think it just reiterates the importance of the family, a healthy family, to pass on the faith, because the government's not going to help you, the culture's not going to help you, but the family, and we need to strengthen that in our efforts to evangelize, to do whatever we can to help families and to pass on the faith that makes for strong marriages.
Absolutely, 100%. And on that point on big tech, I mean, if they can shut down, the president of the United States, if they can shut down many conservative voices, they can certainly shut you down as well. And so we have to be aware of that. But the frustration here for us, especially those who are pro-life and pro-traditional marriage, is just the selectivity that they're shutting down people. They shut down conservative voices, but yet they still allow child pornography, for example. So big tech is in big trouble, and we as Catholics need to be ready to fight, and fight at that core level, and that is to raise up a new generation in our families of holy saints. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that can change this country more than anything else is if we ourselves become saints. So let's do that in the family.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us, and keep up your great work.
Father Mark, thanks so much. It's been great to be with you. God bless you.
Welcome to our Into the Vineyard Challenge segment. I just want to say a word about being out in San Francisco. We did that about a year ago. But, it's such a beautiful place, and it always moves me. And I think, tonight our challenge is not to lose heart, and in this battle for the pro-life culture that we're in. So we need to amp up the prayer life. We need to get connected with God. And nature can have can give us a beautiful help to that. It can calm us. It shouts, creation shouts about the existence and providential care that God has over us. So I encourage you to spend some time, take some walks, reflect on some of the natural beauty, and let that lead you into prayer.
And God's grace builds on our nature. St. Thomas teaches that. I think that's such a beautiful teaching, that God is going to raise us up. We a lot of times don't ever feel called to the challenge or what may lay ahead before us. But, we do have to look to Christ and to the cross. And, there are times where God's going to give us great blessings and great joys in our life to keep further us along. But he's also going to give us those crosses too, that may challenge us, that may draw us more into a penitential life or even a life of deeper prayer and a greater trust into his providential care.
You know, tonight we talked about some great challenges we face in our culture, and it's easy to lose heart.
Yeah.
And, you know, something I've always been blessed by being here at EWTN is seeing so many great people we bring in who are out there doing great work. And we should let that encourage us and do our own great work, you know, whatever God has called us to be and do. But as we mentioned tonight, you know, we have to be rooted in prayer, you know, find a way to talk to God and to be connected to him that works best for you. We have beautiful tradition in our Catholic Church about prayer, but we have a struggle in front of us. You know, we need to fight for the dignity of marriage and family, for the dignity of the immigrant, for all the pro-life issues.
And we know we live in the age of information. And a lot of us do have to be aware of a lot of these issues, but how do we approach them? But the resources are there, and Peter Range, he has a lot.
Right.
You know, he got a lot of outlets out there.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think as a Catholic community, it's easy to just share, hey, have you ever checked out this site or this book or this podcast? Those are all available to us that, you know, generations before did not have. But we really have at the tips of our fingers to really have great access to great information to really bring an awareness to these issues out to the forefront.
So our challenge this week is not to lose heart. And the reason we don't is because God has poured his Holy Spirit into our hearts. So we want to send you into that vineyard with a blessing. May God the Father bless you and keep you. May he shine his face upon you. And may he pour forth his Holy Spirit into your heart. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week on Life on the Rock.
Fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, for I am with you. When you pass through the water, I'll be with you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. Horse and chariot you have cast into the sea. The walls of Jericho, watch them crumble to their knees. I'll guard you from temptation if you but call out to me. I will be your comfort when you are weary. Fear not, for I am with you. Fear not, for I am with you. I've wiped out your offenses and I've set the captives free. I've opened up a pathway and lead to streams the thirsty. For I am with you always, though you may not always see. So fear not, my child, fear not, fear